have now entered a podcast show. A podcast show that you can listen to. A podcast show that talks about movies that you've either enjoyed, disliked, or a bit of both. This month, a podcast show that has entered a month full of surprises, dark moments, and the scariest of bunch to come in the month of October. You've just entered Codo Cinema Horror Month.
Good afternoon, and welcome to another spooky episode of Codo Cinema, the podcast show where I talk about movies. I bid you welcome as your host, the man, the myth, the legend, Mark Codo, aka Codo Man. When it comes to scary movies or films with different genres, there is a classical horror film and a remake of a horror film as well. For example, there's the classic 1984 Nightmare on Elm Street, along with a 2010 reboot of the same name. You even got a remake based on the 1960 Alfred Hitchcock classic of Psycho, plus multiple Halloween films from the mind of John Carpenter, starting with the 1978 film of the same name with Jamie Lee Curtis, spawning many sequels, including 2 reboots, one for Rob Zombie and one from 2018 with Jamie Lee Curtis returning, including the 2021 sequel, Halloween Kills, which is also coming out as well. Even Friday the 13th had many sequels, including a 2009 remake of the same name. That's a lot of remakes for multiple horror films. There's a few other horror movies that got classics and remakes, but what about different film genres with scary elements? Well, there is one film that comes to mind, and that is the dark fantasy comedy film The Witches, the 1990 film and the 2020 remake. Based on the fantasy children's book by Roald Dahl, who wrote many great children's books, including Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Matilda, including Fantastic Mr. Fox, The Witches is set partly in Norway and partly in England, and features the experiences of a young English boy and his Norwegian grandmother in a world where child-hating societies of witches secretly exist in every country. The witches are ruled by the extremely vicious and powerful Grand High Witch, who arrives in England to organize her plans to turn all of the children in England into mice. And yeah, that's basically the plot of the book. In the original book. And basically, how do the witches turn the kids into mice? Well, they use a secret formula, or should I say a magic potion, called the Formula 86 Delayed Action Mouse Maker, which is a magic potion which turns the consumer into a mouse at a specified time set by the potion maker. So yeah, that's basically the potion that the witches use to turn the children into mice. And of course, that is that is scary right there. Wow. That is pretty scary, especially in the book, because I mean, Roald Dahl is never shy of putting in some scary elements into children's books. I mean, The Witches isn't the only book to do that. So, I mean, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory might have done some things too, including Matilda. So anyway, going to both films, the 1990 and the 2020 remake of The Witches, they have the same plot as the book. However, there are differences between the 2 films and the book. The 1990 film had an American boy named Luke Evernsham, rather than having a known name, because the original book didn't name the English boy. They just said basically he's the narrator. Basically, the young English boy is the narrator of the book, and in the original book, the ending of the film and then the 1990 film had the ending of the film where Luke who was still a mouse but was turned back into a human by one of the witches, who turned out to be good. So yeah, there's that. The 1990 film was also set in Norway, while the 2020 remake, directed by Robert Zemeckis, was set in 1960s Alabama, with the protagonist as an African-American boy called the Hero Boy. Plus, the 2020 film sticks with the ending of the original book, where the Hero Boy remains a mouse rather than turning back into a human being, which is also questioning why the 1990 film didn't have the young boy Luke remain a mouse for the rest of his life, because that was the original ending in the book. It could, so in my thoughts, it was probably test screen audiences that probably wanted a different ending. So yeah, but anyway, also the 1990 film was also partly set in England. I mean, Norway. Yes, part of the film was in Norway, part of the film was in England. So yeah. So you're probably asking, which film did it better, the 1990 Witches film or the 2020 remake of The Witches? Well, I'm going to break down both films through its main antagonist, supporting characters, the mice, musical score, production values, creepiness factor, or should I say, the tone, and overall story. So anyway, before jumping into the comparisons of both films, I have never read the original book, so that's a surprise right there. I've seen both films, but I have never read the original book of The Witches. I never have, but I have heard the story before. The only book that I actually read from Roald Dahl would be Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I was a little kid in 3rd grade when my 3rd grade teacher read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and of course we watched the 2005 Tim Burton version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which starred Johnny Depp as Willy Wonka. And while obviously I knew there was a 1971 film of Willy Wonka, I didn't realize there was a 2005 version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So yeah, just wanted to throw that out there. So anyway, let me jump into the first round. Now, the first round of The Witches is basically the main antagonist, which is the main character being the Grand High Witch. The Grand High Witch was played by Angelica Houston in the 1990 film, with Anne Hathaway playing the Grand High Witch in the 2020 remake. So let's jump into that. So move over, Sanderson sisters. So there was an evil witch before you three. So yep, the Grand High Witch. And if there are any main characters in both films and the book of The Witches, it's the Grand High Witch herself. The Grand High Witch is a powerful, evil, and feared witch who hides her ancient age and hideous appearance behind an attractive disguise in order to blend in with society, and plots to wipe out all the children in England after summoning the local witches for the task. Basically, that is basically the plot, or the goal for the Grand High Witch in the book and both films. So, going to the 1990 film, Angelica Houston plays the Grand High Witch, otherwise known as Miss Eva Ernst. And as I mentioned, Anne Hathaway plays the Grand High Witch, but also having a different name named Lilith in the 2020 film. Now, both of them also have over-the-top accents, and they're mostly German accents, and I feel like Angelica Houston's take had a more of a German accent. The same can be said with Anne Hathaway, but the accent feels a little different. Not like in an American accent, but more like somewhere in between. And both Angelica Houston and Anne Hathaway, both of their portrayals of the Grand High Witch are different, but they do have the same idea and goal to turn all the children into mice. Now, with Angelica Houston's performance as the Grand High Witch, many people praised her performance as the Grand High Witch. Plus, many people even said that this is the role she is meant to play. And that is really saying something, because when I actually saw the 1990 film, I was like, dang, Angelica Houston really nailed the role. She did, and I will say this, she did a pretty amazing job as the Grand High Witch. Even the author himself praised Angelica Houston's performance as the Grand High Witch. More on Roald Dahl later. Even the makeup effects on Angelica Houston when going into the form of a witch are some of the best special effects, or makeup effects, I should say, that is being put to screen in the 1990s. And no joke, these makeup effects are probably some of the scariest effects I have ever seen, especially in a children's film, because this is also a children's film as well. Even though it doesn't look like a children's film. I mean, it kind of does. It kind of does. I mean, for the most part, that's what many people are saying. But like, still, I mean, how is that a children's film? Fun fact: it took 6 hours to put the makeup on Angelica Houston and another 6 to take it off. Now, Anne Hathaway's performance as the Grand High Witch, I will say, in her own take, does a pretty good job with her own portrayal, but it doesn't really hold a candle to the original as much. Now, because, I mean, here's the thing. Different actors and actresses do have their own takes on the characters in a classic versus remake, so it's going to be different. So it's going to be different, even if whether or not they top the original or not. Now, to be fair, Anne Hathaway does try to capture the over-the-top German accent, but part of it seems off due to the multiple screams that she's doing when performing. And plus, Anne Hathaway's got CGI scars on her face. I mean, man, great Scott! I'll admit, the CGI scars on the Grand High Witch's face in the 2020 remake, I will say that is creative and creepy at the same time. But it's also obvious that is CGI, and that's actually pretty. I will say that is actually some pretty good CGI right there. I mean, even the CGI arms stretching out of the Grand High Witch in the 2020 remake creeped me out, and I did not see that one coming. I mean, wow, that is just creepy. Now, when watching the 2020 film, you could definitely tell, and I kind of pointed this out too, I caught that you could tell that Anne Hathaway is having fun playing the Grand High Witch. The same could be said with Angelica Houston. But somehow, even though Anne Hathaway is having fun playing the Grand High Witch in the remake, but nowhere near as memorable as Angelica Houston's take in the 1990 film. So technically, Angelica Houston nailed the role of the Grand High Witch in the 1990 film. So anyway, as much as I like Anne Hathaway's take, it's Angelica Houston's performance that takes the first round. So I'm giving the first point to the 1990 film. So basically, Angelica. So basically, the winner of this round goes to the 1990 Witches film. Score is 1-0. The 1990 film. Now that I got the main antagonist out of the way, let's look at our supporting characters. So round 2 is supporting characters. The other characters in The Witches is the grandma, the grandson, Bruno, and the hotel manager, Mr. Stringer. So the grandma in the 1990 film is named Helga Evesham, played by Swedish actress Maj Zetterling, while the grandma in the 2020 film is being played by Octavia Spencer. On a side note, for the 2020 remake, Octavia Spencer is one of the best casting choices in the 2020 remake, adding a little charm and sassiness while staying true to the clever and caring nature of the character for the grandma. So that was actually, I will say this, that is still a good casting choice right there. The same can be said with the casting of Stanley Tucci as the hotel manager, Mr. Stringer, despite his short screen time for the 2020 remake. Rowan Atkinson brings in a memorable performance as Mr. Stringer, even if his moments calls back to his character of Mr. Bean. The young boy in the Witch's book doesn't have a name, and the same can be said with the grandma. The young boy in the 1990 film is named Luke, and he's being played by Jason Fisher, while the 2020 remake is called The Hero Boy, played by Jahir Kazim Bruno. So you probably might be asking yourself why in the 1990 film is the name Luke, while the 2020 remake has the name of the boy being called the Hero Boy. Well, obviously because the original book they didn't give the grandson a name. Plus, he was known as the narrator. And going into narration, Chris Rock plays an older version of the Hero Boy in mouse form, and he does appear in the beginning as the narrator, including parts of the film, but in the end he does come out as a mouse, as the older version of the Hero Boy, but in mouse form. So yeah, and I will say, I mean, as much as I like Chris Rock in this film, yeah, the narration can be a little off-putting. Which sounds like another episode of Everybody Hates Chris. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people who have seen the 2020 remake has got those Everybody Hates Chris moments in this film. So, also, yeah. So anyway, pretty much, yeah. And speaking of Bruno, Bruno befriends the young boy in both films after Bruno turns into a mouse, and yes, the Hero Boy also turns into a mouse. But the two work together to stop the witches from turning all the children into mice. Bruno was played by Charlie Potter in the 1990 film, while the 2020 remake was played by Cody Lee Eastick. Both actors do a fine job as Bruno, but the 1990 film had a little more personality and charm for both Bruno and Luke in the 1990 film. Also, the 2020 remake also has a pet mouse that the Hero Boy has, and the name of the pet mouse is Daisy, which is another character in this film, who basically in the remake I should say, because in the film of the 2020 remake, Daisy, the pet mouse Daisy, is being played by Kristen Chenoweth, and she voices the mouse Daisy, which is another supporting character, pretty much. Now, as much as the 2020 film tries to capture the supporting characters of the 1990 film, and as much as I love Octavia Spencer in the 2020 remake, I have to give this next point to the 1990 film, because the supporting characters of the 1990 film have more memorable performances and moments to spare, and a little charm and personality. So, round 2 goes to the 1990 film. Score is 2-0, 1990 film. Well, since the plot of the book and films have the witches turned children into mice, let me dive into the mice. So round 3 is the mice. Now, I will say this. Round 3 for the mice is going to be a tough call on my part. So let me break this down. Both films had a different take to bring the mice alive on the big screen. The 1990 film used real mice and animatronics with the support of the Jim Henson Company for the puppeteering for the puppet work on the mice, while the 2020 film used CGI to bring the mice alive. Now, I will admit, both films did an amazing job bringing the mice to life, but both films had its fair share of flaws. So anyway, the 1990 film, they were the film was partnered up with the Jim Henson Company, and the Jim Henson Company was the production company responsible to bring the mice to life in the 1990 film. Luke and Bruno were turned into mice, but there were moments where the mice do come out as wonky animatronics from theme parks during the wide shot moments. The close-up shots with the mouse and basically what I meant by close up, I'm talking about like close up to their faces, to the face of the mouse. Those close up shots are actually pretty good because it has to do with the puppeteering work. In fact, some shots do feature real mice, and I see that as a good combination. And they mix it up pretty well. They got good close-up shots of the puppeteering work of the face of the mice. Plus, there's also includes some of the wide shots with the other mice, even though they do look like animatronics. But at times, you also get shots where they feature real mice, and that's actually pretty good mix despite its flaws. Granted, the mice in the 2020 remake are, in fact, CGI, so many people will point out that it's unrealistic. And since the remake is directed by Robert Zemeckis, it is obvious that he was going to go for the special effects route on the mice. Or should I say CGI. Yeah, there are a lot of unnecessary CGI moments, particularly the chicken in the beginning of the film, the snake, and the cat. You know, the cat that the Grand High Witch has in the film, to which the cat is on her arm. Yeah, that's CGI. The CGI mice, however, they do have a very good design to add to their personalities, which I like. I like that. I really like that. Heck, the CGI reminds me of Stuart Little. I mean, I think from the design for Daisy, but it does give me some Stuart Little vibes. And overall, the CGI does blend in the CGI for the mice blend in pretty well with cinematography whenever the mice are running around. So, anyway, that being said, which film am I going to select for round 3? Well, in my opinion, and for the record, this entire comparison, classic versus remake episode, this is all opinion based, by the way. So, yeah, this is just for my opinion. This is my opinion, by the way. This is a tough call, but in my opinion, as much as I love the mice in the 1990 film, I'm actually going to go with the 2020 remake on this round due to the personality, design, and overall energy that the mice have in the 2020 remake. So, round 3 goes to the 2020 remake. Score is 2-1 with the 1990 film still taking the lead. Since I mentioned the mice, how about I go into the production values of the film? This means visual effects, makeup effects, production design, among many other values. So let's go to round 4, production values. Both the 1990 film and the 2020 remake has a unique take on its production. So anyway, the 1990 film takes place in Norway, but later moved to England due to the location of the hotel that Luke and his grandma are staying at. The 1990 film is widely remembered for its outstanding and scary makeup effects for the witches, including the Grand High Witch. The makeup effects took 6 hours to be put on for Angelica Houston, with another 6 hours to remove the makeup. The special effects for the witches film in the 1990 film was done by Nigel Booth, the same special effects artist who did the effects for 1986's Aliens with director James Cameron. The Jim Henson Company were also responsible for bringing the mice to life. Costume designer Mariette Allen brings in an authentic and spooky take for the costume designs on the witches. Now, the 2020 remake does give the production values a modern spin, despite its 1960s setting. The costume designs for the witches takes a modern, elegant spin from costume designer Joanna Johnston, who has collaborated with director Robert Zemeckis on multiple film projects, including Back to the Future, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Polar Express, Forrest Gump, among many others. Joanna even collaborated with director Steven Spielberg on multiple films as well, including Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. While the makeup effects are practical for the witches, there is a CGI spin with the scars on Anne Hathaway's face during the conference room scene, giving it a creeping look to the Grand High Witch. I mean, she looks like Melina from Mortal Kombat with those scars. Or should I say, or with the scars, yeah. and I'm pretty sure there's also some Pennywise the Clown vibes for the 2017 remake of It, and of course the Heath Ledger's Joker callback, a little callback to the scars on Heath Ledger's Joker from The Dark Knight. So yeah, so I will say this: both the 1990 film and the 2020 remake have great production values, but it's the 1990 film that takes the next point in this round due to the outstanding makeup effects that gives the film an edge, and the makeup effects holding up to this day. So point goes to the 1990 film. Score is 3-1, the 1990 film. Now, let me tell you why I gave this point to the 1990 film for its production values, while I gave the other point to the mice for the 2020 remake. Because I was looking at just the mice in general for that third round, because I mean, I wasn't calling it out on production values. I was calling out on the visual not the visual, well, actually kind of the visual effects, but also just the mice in general. While production values as a whole, that's why I was looking at production values as a whole for this round compared to the other round I gave the point to. So basically, it's basically two separate things. But if I was saying like, well, maybe the 1990 film did a much better job with this visual effects. True, it did, but that was more. I was looking at more on the mice, just the mice on that third round. But for that fourth round I just did, that was just for the production values. So that was basically two different rounds of two different types. Those are two different types of things going on. Basically, the visual effects on the mice and the production values as a whole for the film. So that was two different things. That was like two different things. So I had to give you my reasoning for that. So yeah. Anyway, score is 3-1. The 1990 film still taking the lead. So now, normally I do the overall story for the end, but there is a lot more to add on because obviously it's basically the original ending of how the original ending in the book was also part of the 2020 remake, while the ending in the 1990 film was a little different. So let me dive into that. When it comes to film to book adaptations, there are a few changes and additions here and there, and Roald Dahl's The Witches is no exception. Both the 1990 and 2020 remake tried to stay close to the book, but there were a few additions and changes made. The 2020 remake had a change of setting. Instead of Norway and England, the film was set in 1960s Alabama. There is also another mouse in the film, as I mentioned, that would be Daisy, who was once a young orphan girl turned into a mouse by the witches. Robert Zemeckis was not only attached as director, but as screenwriter, including legendary director Guillermo del Toro, who also served as producer. This also goes with Alfonso Cuarón, because Alfonso Cuarón also served as producer for the film as well. So Guillermo del Toro also served as writer and producer. So you're kind of expecting like, Guillermo del Toro has done some horror films too. So like Hellboy, Hellboy 2, The Golden Army. What are the films I'm thinking? Pan's Labyrinth. That's another film. Chronos, and of course his Oscar-winning film The Shape of Water. Now, Alfonso Cuarón, he has done a few good films under his belt. I think the most memorable I could get out of is Gravity, which stars Sandra Bullock and George Clooney. He also directed Roma, but if there's anything in terms of scary elements, it would be the third installment for Harry Potter, which is Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, that Alfonso Cuarón has done. So going back to the 2020 Witches film, the 2020 film actually had the original ending from the book, because in the book, the boy remains a mouse for the rest of his life. The 1990 film tried to capture the spirit of the book while also making it a family film. I mentioned kids film because it does look like a kids film, but at the same time, are you really sure The Witches is a kids film? I mean, it may look like it because of the Jim Henson Company, but are you sure about that, people? Ooh, that's pretty tough. Pretty tough film to go through, especially for an early 90s film. The film's ending for the 1990 film was changed. The original ending in the book was the boy remaining a mouse for his entire life, but for the film, one of the witch's assistants turned the young boy Luke back into a real boy. Now, the film was directed by Nicholas Roeg, and he actually had two different film versions of the 1990 Witches film for test screen audiences. One that featured the original ending where Luke remained a mouse, and the other version where Luke was turned back into a real boy. Roald Dahl was driven to tears when he saw the one version where it had his original ending, but the director went with the changed ending, and Dahl demanded that his name should be removed from the credits. But he praised Angelica Houston's performance as the Grand High Witch. So there's a bit of a silver lining. Well, it isn't the first time one of Dahl's books made different changes to the big screen, as 1971's Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory would also have different changes in character focus between Willy Wonka and Charlie. He disliked the casting choice of Gene Wilder as Willy Wonka, since Dahl thought Peter Sellers or Spike Milligan would have been good choices for Willy Wonka. So wasn't the first time that Dahl disliked one of his books to be adapted to the big screen. Now, as I mentioned, both films had a few changes and additions, but since the 2020 remake went with the original ending where the boy remained a mouse, I have to give this next point to the remake for sticking with the original ending. So this point goes to the 2020 remake. Score is 3-2, with the 1990 film still in the lead. Now, what's good about having a film is by having a good musical score. Let's look at the music. So round 6 is the musical score with Stanley Myers versus Alan Silvestri. Now, both scores for both films are very different, so let me break down the composers of these films. Stanley Myers was the man responsible for composing The Witches. Plus, he has worked closely with director Nicholas Roeg. In fact, Stanley Myers composed the score for 1978's epic war drama The Deer Hunter with director Michael Giacchino. And Stanley has composed 6 episodes of Doctor Who in 1964. Plus, served as a collaborator and mentor to composer Hans Zimmer. As for The Witches, Stanley Myers gives the score a whimsical vibe, since part of the film is a dark fantasy comedy while being a quote-unquote kids film. Plus, the score uses a lot of woodwinds and string instruments, which gives into the whimsical vibe, and that's actually pretty good. I also liked how part of the score has a melody that focuses on the mice, as if I was hearing the mice running around in the hotel, since Luke and Bruno are mice in the film. And if you think the melody for the mice of the score was whimsical, it does get serious during the witches' conference scene when the brass section comes in with a different melody to reveal the Grand High Witch, as if it was scaring the audience once they first saw the film. Now, Alan Silvestri composed the 2020 remake of the same name, and he brings a monumental score with mostly sections from the brass and percussion. Now, I will say this: I love Alan Silvestri. Alan Silvestri is probably my top 3 favorite composers of all time. He's easily one of my top 3 favorite composers. And he has collaborated with Robert Zemeckis on a lot of films, like Back to the Future, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Forrest Gump, Polar Express, Castaway. The list keeps going. And while the score was not as whimsical as Stanley Myers, Alan does manage to bring in some haunting melodies when it comes to the witches popping out. And when I mean popping out, I mean revealing themselves. in different scenes, or should I say, showing up in different scenes. For the most part, Alan Silvestri adds a haunting vibe to the score with the addition of drums, xylophones, cellos, basses, among many other instruments. The score does pick the tempo up a bit whenever there's a scene with the mice, and it does add a bit of a Ratatouille vibe whenever the mice are running around trying to get back to the hero boy's grandmother. Now, as much as I enjoyed Stanley Meyer's score, I actually like Alan Silvestri's score a little more. Because the score for Alan Silvestri did give me hype. It did. It really got me hyped for the 2020 remake. And the haunting vibes from Alan Silvestri do give in a bit of a different tone to the score. So that was actually pretty good. So anyway, the next point goes to the 2020 remake. Score is tied 3-3. Now it's time to go into the creepy level factor of both films, and that is the tone. So let's go into round 7. That being said, the tone. Both films have tones that are very lighthearted and dark at the same time. Robert Zemeckis is never shy of having a dark tone in his lighthearted films, such as Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Polar Express, Back to the Future Part 2, and Disney's A Christmas Carol. While the tone for the 2020 remake is mostly lighthearted, it has its fair share of dark moments, including the ending where the boy remains a mouse. And yes, the original ending in the original book, yes, that was pretty dark, where the young boy remains a mouse. So yeah. And while the tone for the 2020 remake is mostly lighthearted, which I already mentioned, the tone itself is mostly toned down. Or should I say the dark moments of the tone is basically toned down, just to play it safe. Particularly the transformation scene, because the transformation scene in both films are easily some of the most memorable moments in both films. But I feel like the 1990 film had the most memorable, is easily one of the most memorable moments in the film where Bruno and Luke were transformed into mice, but they literally shrink down while going into the effect of the potion they took. Whoa, or should I say the potion that the witches gave them. But in the 2020 remake, yes, both Bruno and the hero boy were given the potion by the witches, but instead of shrinking down, they jump up into the air, disappear, and as their clothes are floating down, they come out as mice. They come out in their mouse form shape. And while that's creepy enough, but still, why jumping up into the air? They did the same thing in the ending since the witches were also given the potion in their soup, but that was in both films too. But the only difference in the 2020 remake is that whenever the witches took the potion by accident because the hero boy dumped the potion into the soup, they all jump up into the air, disappear as their clothes are floating down. They come out as rats, and no joke, because in the 2020 remake they come out as rats instead of mice. They look like rats in the 2020 remake, and that really scared me too. But at the same time, it feels a little toned down, especially when you have Guillermo del Toro, one of the more famous directors, I should say, who has done a lot of horror movies as well. I mean that scene where all the witches turn into rats, that could have been a little more scary because they come out as rats instead of mice. As in the 1990 film, they come out as mice. That's still scary too, but also memorable because here's the thing: the transformation in the 1990 film was a little longer, while in the 2020 remake, it come out very fast. That was fast. Great Scott! Yeah. So yeah. I mean, yeah, the 1990 film, going to the 1990 film, as I mentioned already, mentioned the transformation scene. How about the makeup? I'm going back to the makeup on that because the makeup effects for the Grand High Witch, including the other witches, are easily some of the best makeup effects that I've ever seen. Where was that Oscar nomination for that? And where was Angelica Houston's Oscar nomination for that film? I mean, yeah. I mean, still scares, and it really scared me that when I actually saw it. I mean, I even seen a few clips before watching the film because when I heard about it, I was like, there's a movie called The Witches, and I was like, oh my goodness, that is some of the scariest makeup effects that I've ever seen, and it still holds up to this day. And the mouse transformation scene in The Witches still very dark and scary, and especially for a kid's film. Yeah. So anyway, for the sake of the tone, I have to give this last point to the 1990 film, since it was able to balance out the lighthearted and dark moments, especially when it's not toned down for an early 90s film. So, winner of this round goes to the 1990 film. Score is 4-3 with the 1990 film of The Witches. The Witches film that came out in 1990 wins the classic versus remake episode for Codo Cinema. So, what did you think? Was this a fair comparison? Do you all have a different opinion about both films? I mean, did you like the 1990 film better? Did you like the 2020 remake better? I mean, hey, if you like the 2020 remake, that's totally fine. If you like the 1990 film, totally fine as well. And hey, you know what? We all have different opinions on which film that we can like or dislike. And hey, you know what? I mean, it's definitely an opinion. It's up for debate. But hey, you never know. So anyway, thank you for tuning in to Codo Cinema. I'm your host, Mark Codo, aka Codo Man. Remember to watch movies, stay positive, and good night. Until next week.